Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by Patrick Cruywagen. Now, Patrick is an extremely well-traveled adventurer around the world. He was an editor for SA 4x4 magazine. He does content creation for Frontrunner. He has spent quite a bit of time actually with Kingsley Holgate throughout Africa, some significant expeditions throughout the continent and around the world. We learn a lot about how Patrick travels, the lessons that he's learned driving so many different kinds of vehicles. And he's had some really incredible adventure stories that he gets to share with us on this episode. So please enjoy my conversation with Patrick. I also wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of you for listening to the Overland Journal Podcast. By listening to this podcast and subscribing to the Overland Journal magazine, you're supporting our employee-owned and veteran-owned business. Impartial reviews and in-depth content like this would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you'd really love the print magazine as well. And 100% of that subscription price goes back into creating the content like you're listening to right now. And as a special thank you for your loyalty, we're giving 20% off any subscription. And that even includes our special lifetime subscription, which includes numerous lifetime-only benefits. You can go to overlandjournal.com and use the code OverlandPodcast at checkout. Again, that's code OverlandPodcast at checkout, and that'll give you 20% off. I sincerely appreciate your support. Well, Patrick Cruywagen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's an honor to have you. You have an incredible history as an adventurer, but also a long history in the industry and also working with the various publications, both in South Africa and in the UK. So it's going to be really fun to get your take on a few different subjects. But I'd really love to start off with, how did you first get involved with adventure travel?
That's such a good question. It wasn't something I really planned. So I spent a lot of time in the military, 7 years, and that sort of started or developed a love for travel, because I spent some time in Namibia. Was nearly killed in a Land Rover accident there, which I can maybe tell you about later. But that's where the first seed was planted. And then I went back to university after I was in the military, and I studied photojournalism. And I had a lecturer there called Montgomery Cooper.
Okay.
And he was a lovely man. He taught us the ethics of journalism. And Monty would travel all over Africa, going to countries and teaching at various universities. And he told me about this steamship that sails up Lake Malawi. It takes a week to go up and down. And he said, one day we're going to go on this and we're going to take the most incredible images. And sadly, just after I left Rhodes University, where I studied journalism, Monty passed away from malaria.
Oh, wow.
And it struck me. And I, in the back of my head, I always said I wanted to go and do this trip in his honor. And not long after starting out as a journalist, I got the opportunity to take a Toyota up there to Malawi, and we put the vehicle on the ship, but it was crazy. They didn't even have proper cranes, and there was had flying, and I thought had visions of this. It was a prototype Toyota Fortuner, the only one in the country at the time. I had visions of this falling into the lake.
Sure.
And thankfully, they just left it on the deck, and people dried fish on the bonnet of the vehicle and put tarps on the side and slept underneath it, and we sailed up the lake for a week. But I would say Montgomery Cooper, my lecturer at Rhodes University, was the man that really got me into travel and adventure journalism and photography. That's sort of...
Oh, that's an amazing story, and it's such an important reminder of not only honoring the mentors that have helped us in our life, but also being good mentors to others as we get a little bit further on in our careers and we have experiences and maybe some wisdom to share along the way. So, what an amazing story. So did you start in Mozambique, or where did you start on the lake trip?
Oh yeah, so we started in Johannesburg. We picked the vehicle up there, and only once we were on the road we realized Toyota South Africa had given us the wrong paperwork for this vehicle.
Oh no.
It was for a Lexus, and you know what it's like.
Yeah.
At an Africa border crossing. So we sort of we made our way through Mozambique, and from Mozambique we crossed into Malawi. But I'll never forget that border crossing because I had the wrong paperwork. So what I did was I wrote down the Lexus chassis number and engine number on my hand, or on my arm, underneath my top. And when the border official was looking for the engine number, I said, no, it's in a very special place on this prototype. It's underneath the vehicle, but you stand here with the paperwork and I'll climb underneath the vehicle and I'll read it out to you. So I then just lifted up the sleeve on my jersey and I read what I'd written on my arm to this official, and he said, no, that's 100%. And he stamped us into Malawi. So you got to come up with all these sort of tricks and methods, because I didn't have time to drive all the way back to Johannesburg.
Of course not.
To get the right papers. But so I got the vehicle into Malawi with the wrong papers.
Wow. So that was at the Mozambique border.
Yeah.
And then how did you, because you started on the ship in Mozambique?
No, it was in Malawi.
In Malawi,
yeah,
got it. Because doesn't Mozambique have a little bit of the shoreline, maybe?
No, not at all.
It doesn't?
So it's all in Malawi, and it's
Okay.
I think it's 350 miles long, this lake.
Yeah, it's a very long lake.
Yeah, it's an incredible lake.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It was one of the highlights of the Africa trip for me, because there's very little known or very little out there on Malawi as a country. And it's such an impoverished country that you think it's going to be a different experience. But my experience was just so positive. Other than there's so many bicycles on the road. Because they're so poor, they don't even have a motorcycle. Like normally, like in a poorer country, you'll see a lot of motorcycles. But there, they're so impoverished that they can't even afford a motorbike usually.
But it's not called the warm hearts of Africa for nothing. They're the smiles that the people give you, and So that's normally on an African road. A road is life. So you find people next to the road. They're selling stuff. They're looking for a lift. They're looking for a job. But in Malawi, the lake is the life.
Yeah.
So for this week where we sailed up the lake, you would stop and hundreds of Makurus would come up next to the MV Ilala, and they would be trading with people that third class on the bottom deck, second class middle deck, first class top deck. But it was so hot we didn't even sleep in our cabins. We just slept outside on the deck. And the suit from the cold at night would come and cover your face, and you'd wake up with a black face in the morning. It was just you couldn't make it up. It was beautiful. And when you stopped for a little bit, you would jump off the boat into the lake, have a swim, get back onto the boat, and carry on sailing. It's just such a unique way to see a country. It was very, very special. I don't know anyone else that has done it, any other sort of journalist, but
I've never heard of anyone doing that, but it's amazing how happy and fulfilled the people of Malawi are. Again, because I think the lake does provide so many resources, fresh water. You see the kids playing in the lake. I mean, I was always worried about it because there are crocs and hippos in the lake too. So, I mean, I guess you have to, at some point, you just have to take the risk.
Yeah.
You can't not do it. So,
in the center of the lake, when you're sailing, it's pretty safe.
Oh,
yeah.
Sure.
It's the same as if you're in Australia and you're in the Kimberleys and there are salties in the water.
Yeah.
But if you, I don't know, a few miles off the shore, you quickly have it. You jump in and get out again. You take that risk.
Yeah. No, what a special country. So you studied photojournalism, and then did you begin a career in photojournalism after that?
It's tough. You can't just come out of uni and land your dream job, but I'm so fortunate. I've done it twice. I've done it in the UK and in South Africa. There was literally Monday morning, job section, newspaper, do you like adventure, do you like travel? And I walked into this interview and I took a few magazines I'd been published in Men's Health and Runner's World, and I quite like adventure and exercise. And I threw these magazines on the desk and I said, I'm your man, to these guys. And they said, have you traveled to Botswana? And I said, yeah, I had, but I hadn't really, and I'd been to Namibia in the military, but I basically talked my way into a job. And they never got back to me, and I kept on phoning them and hassling them, and then eventually they were probably tired of me, and they offered me a job as a junior journalist at SA 4x4, and I'd never been off-roading. I mean, I had in the military, but
Sure.
I'd never done a formal course or training.
Sure.
And literally my first assignment, they threw me the set of keys to a 2.5 litre diesel Ford Ranger and said, you've got to go and do some trails and write trail reports. And it was embarrassing because the first place I went was in Caledon, just outside Cape Town, and this farmer had quite an extreme trail. And within 5 minutes, his name was Charlie Crowther. I'll never forget it. Charlie looked at me and said, Pat, you don't know what you're doing. I said, yeah, I don't. And he said, I will teach you. And this man, lovely, he's still my friend today, and I still go, when I go home, I go and visit Charlie. And Charlie taught me how to drive off-road on his trail. And then you sort of grow in confidence. And obviously later on I went and did a lot of advanced courses and did some pretty incredible stuff, but I basically learned on the job, and after talking my way into a really good job, and within a year I was editor of the magazine, and I didn't like that because suddenly you are it's a lot of admin and a lot of planning. You've been through all that yourself, but I then changed and I hired a managing editor and I made myself the bush editor, and I just traveled for 10 years. I was off, I was gone, I was out of the office, didn't wear shoes, and I went anywhere I wanted in Africa for a decade. It was the best decade of my life, really.
I can't imagine. Where did you live in South Africa?
So I was based in Cape Town, but
nice.
I was never home. My friends never saw me. Every month I would go out and shoot a cover for the magazine, and I could decide where I wanted to go. So imagine that. I mean, the one trip I did was nuts. We took a Pajero and we drove to the source of the Nile. It took 6 weeks. I mean, where else in a job can you say, listen, I'm just going to go away for 6 weeks? I mean, I came back with 20 stories.
Sure.
You have to. There's just so much to see and do in that time. But it was definitely, if I look back on my life now, I'm 50 years old, but those 10 years at SA 4x4 magazine were just magic. I mean,
and that's a great publication. Is it still in print?
Sadly not. COVID killed it. COVID killed a lot of magazines. And because in South Africa the postal services imploded, if you can't send magazines to subscribers, I mean, we're still lucky in the UK we can do it. But sadly the magazine folded.
That seems to be the biggest challenge. I mean, even sending magazines by DHL to South Africa is about half of the time they get there. And it's just an envelope. I mean, it's not even something necessarily of value, and it just doesn't seem to arrive at its location.
No.
So, but that's too bad, because I and maybe it was underneath your editorship, but I did write a couple stories for SA 4x4, including one of our tire reviews that was published in the book. So
I think that was our first dealings. I know obviously we saw each other at Expo West last year, but you and I used to mail each other.
That's right.
In my time as editor or bush editor of the magazine.
I mean, just it was unfortunately, just a really well done publication, beautiful color and big book, and
It was a lovely family-owned business. They had 3 titles. They had a boating magazine, a caravanning magazine, and SA 4x4 was the flagship magazine. And at its height, the guy that I employed as managing editor, Neil Harrison, did a fantastic job. Just took the magazine to a good place. We were a good team. We were a strong team. So, it was flying at that stage. And it's funny, I spoke to the old owner recently, and he said, Pat, I wish I could roll back the years and have you and Neil there again, and like the old days, but you and I both know media has moved on so much. It's so different to when we first started out. There's still a massive demand for great books and top articles and good images, but things have changed somewhat.
Yeah, and you have to constantly be diversifying because it is changing so quickly. And I think at this stage of media, it's really, I think, holding our breath on how the world responds to AI, and also some protection for knowledge workers where their content isn't being used as a mining source for AI algorithms. And that's starting to come out, and it's starting to change, because there has to be some accountability towards that. Because if you were to do an AI search on South Africa, there's a very good chance that a lot of what that AI has come back with came from you.
Of course.
And then how do you be compensated for that? And how do we make sure that we're protecting those original idea individuals from that threat? Because otherwise, if you can't make money as a content producer, as a premium content producer, then all of that knowledge goes away. And then the AI will just recirculate what's already been talked about.
That's such a good point. But fortunately for us, things change. I mean, we used to use brat guides as the Bibles when we traveled in Africa, and the Chinese have come in and they're constantly building new roads. Tracks for Africa is constantly updating its mapping systems. So there is still a demand for fresh, up-to-date travel information, and I think that's where people like us, who have got the connections on the ground and an ear to the ground, and we know what's going on, the AI can't do that.
No, it really can't, and I think there'll be an elevated segment of content like original books, premium print, maybe even some paywall stuff where people, they want to have that authoritative voice and they want to know that it's been vetted thoroughly. But it's just you're constantly evolving. Things like this podcast where, for the most part, AI can't have this conversation.
No.
Where you have two people with experience that get to chat together and share that information with an audience. So it's a difficult thing to replicate.
No, you can't. And that's why my previous magazine I worked for, Land Rover Monthly in the UK, a few weeks ago, they started their podcasts.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
Yeah. Obviously, learning from people like yourself and realizing you got to get on that bandwagon, and AI can't do that.
Yeah, it's not something that can be replicated.
Yeah.
So let's switch topics a little bit to vehicles, because as an editor, you would have driven them all. If you were to pick in your 30 plus years of travel, what's your top 3 vehicles that you have either tested or owned, the ones you really love?
See, it's funny, when I worked at SA 4x4, there was 3 of us, 3 journalists there at the time, and we all owned different vehicles. Neil had an old Hilux, Grant loved his Jeep,
the
boxy 4-litre Jeep, and I, for some reason, always loved the 2.8 Defender, which was only sold in South Africa. That's with the BMW M52 engine.
Yep.
So I'm going to put that at the top of my list because I've owned one for 20 years.
Sure.
So
you still have it?
I recently sold it.
Oh.
Literally a month or 2 ago. It's not practical for my life at the moment.
Yeah, of course.
It's the first time I've been Defenderless and I've got a Subaru Outback now, which I love, and I drive it a lot. But so that's my number one, is a Defender, and it has to be a 110. I used to have a 90 2.8 when I was a single man on my own, easy off into the Tankwa Karoo or wherever. But when you've got a son and a partner, you need space.
Yeah.
So you need a long wheelbase 4-wheel drive. So Defender 110 2.8, number one. I had some issues with mine, but we were always able, with the experts that I know and friends, we were always able to sort it out, and I loved that vehicle.
They very rarely leave you stranded, Defenders. I mean, other models of Land Rovers will leave you stranded.
Oh, yeah.
Defenders very rarely actually leave you stranded. Right. You'll have, like, the blinkers will stop working, or the windshield wipers will stop working, stuff like that. But it's not. It's very rare that they'll flat out leave you stranded.
No. You can always get home in there, especially if you have driving in Africa and you've got a TD5 diesel or a 300 TDI. They are bulletproof. They just go on and on and on.
They really do. Yeah, the 300 TDI in particular is just so well made.
So even though I said that's my favorite, if I was going to do an African crossing, I would take a TD5 every day of the week. Yeah. So I interviewed someone a day or 2 ago from Germany, and they've just spent 3.5 months with a TD5 in southern Africa, and they had no issues at all. So obviously there were the small little sensors, and those are things you can fix.
Yeah.
Take along a diagnostic tool, 5 minutes to sort it out. It's just all the dust and
so true.
Yeah.
And Graham and Louisa Bell, they've done so many travels
exactly.
in their TD5, and theirs has been up until recently. But then again, it's getting very, very high kilometers.
It is.
So I think for their first 5 or 6 years of travel, they had no issues. I was thinking yesterday, probably the vehicle, if I was in London, I would probably want a new Defender 90.
Of course.
Because it's small, it's comfortable, and you can explore all of Europe, Morocco. It would be great for all of that. Exactly. I think I'd want just a brand new, whatever had the most fuel efficient engine. We saw one at the Goodwood Festival that was like a utility version. Yeah. So it had 3 seats in the front, no back seat. It had a cargo barrier and no rear windows. And so it was just a box, but tiny, small, like not as small as like a Suzuki or something like that, but it's a small car. But 18-inch steel wheels. I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the commercial.
Yeah.
And
we don't get those in the U.S.
Oh, don't you?
No, we don't get the commercial version.
Yeah, so they're quite popular to kid out or for farmers. Just throw everything in the back. You can rinse it out still with a hose pipe. And it's got 3 seats in the front. So the commercial is a popular option.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that because when I saw it at the show and I was walking through the Land Rover booth, I was like, you know what? that thing is really sweet.
Yeah.
Like I would buy that.
Yeah, you'll see a few of them zooting around.
I have, yeah.
Around London, yeah.
And well, with parking, it's such a premium, or the spaces are really small. It's got a great turning radius.
Yeah.
I was like, that'd be a pretty sweet little ride.
Yeah. So yeah, that's our number one is a Defender. And if you are living in London, why not get a new one? Exactly. And also you don't have to worry about being compliant for London emissions. So that's perfect. My number two, because I spent so much time in Africa driving Toyotas, it would probably be a Hilux, because they're so popular there, and it's like Defenders are stolen in the UK for their parts and stripped, and the same happens to a Hilux in South Africa, which is quite sad. But I would probably get a double cab Hilux with a camper, a rooftop tent, and some sort of canopy on the back, so you can kit it out. I mean, Jeremy Clarkson showed us in Top Gear how they're sort of indestructible, and double cabs are popular in South Africa.
They really are.
Yeah. So and they're nice to kit out, and you can use it as an everyday driver as well. You can seat 5 people in it. So
and they get fairly good fuel economy. You just have to have about 10 different anti-theft devices on them.
That's the only issue.
I had borrowed Jess's Hilux from Easy On.
Yeah.
And I drove it, enjoyed it. 2 weeks after I gave it back to him, it was gone.
Really?
Yeah, in the hospital parking lot.
Oh my goodness. I know I had a friend, my best friend from school, George as well, bought a Hilux. Within a few days, the golf course got nicked. Now he drives a Jeep.
Yeah.
And you know what the irony is, Scott? I love this though. If you had a Defender in Cape Town or Cederberg, no one will touch it because they know there's a chance it's going to break down. It's not reliable, even though you and I have just said it is if you've got a TD5 or a 300 TDI. But it's so funny how people. But yeah, in the UK, in London, you can't insure a new Range Rover, but in South Africa, it's just the other way around. It's incredible how people's mentality works.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Different continents.
Yeah, I remember a good friend of mine in Guatemala. He loved Toyotas, but he drove a Range Rover Classic in Guatemala. And I said, "Why do you drive a Range Rover Classic?" He's like, "I'm not going to get carjacked." And I was like, "That's a good point."
Yeah.
He's like, "I have my family with me." He's like, "No one touches this car." He's like, "I can leave it unlocked.
Yeah.
Nobody wants it."
Yeah.
And I was like, "That's a great idea." I mean, that's a really valid point. Yeah. Because in Africa, if you're driving around in a Toyota 70 Series, it's like seeing a Rolex on someone's wrist.
It is. It's exactly that. Yeah.
Whereas it was interesting driving the Grenadier across Africa because no one really looked at it twice. It wasn't something. It wasn't a commodity by any means. It was something completely unusual. So not only would they not have a market for anything in the vehicle, they would be highly identifiable as driving it.
Yeah.
Because there was only one, like in Mozambique or Malawi or whatever.
Yeah.
So it'd be really easy to find them.
Yeah, I made a rookie error once in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. We're driving a 70 Series, and we're looking for a place to stay. We don't normally go into the cities, and this was when Zimbabwe's inflation was going through the roof, so people were desperate. And I'd been warned in Bulawayo, just be careful. And it's St. Paddy's Day, I was looking for an Irish bar, so you can have a bit of a dance and a few pints of Guinness. And so I stopped to ask someone about accommodation, and I hadn't locked the vehicle, but I was looking at it, and within a second there was someone in the front of the vehicle, and I chased the guy. It was a cop in his uniform trying to break into my vehicle.
Wow. And
then he saw me and he ran away, jumped into a police car. I stuck my head in the window to try and pull him out, and they drove away and I fell into the road. But yeah, that's a 70 Series in Bulawayo. But I'd been warned, so it was silly. I should have just locked the vehicle. But because you're just chatting to someone on the pavement, inquiring about a hotel nearby,
and you're right there.
It happens so quickly. But I've been so fortunate in Africa. There've been no incidents where we've had a vehicle stolen or broken into, and that's in 20 years of travel. That's quite remarkable.
Yeah, it seems to be that either things go really well or they go really bad.
Yeah.
You know, I just even in all of my time in Africa, I've just never had an issue. But then, people, you'll talk to them and their brother was killed in a carjacking or something. So it's very real.
It is, yeah.
It's very real. You have to be, and it's just so sad because it's my favorite place in the world.
Yeah.
South Africa.
I think it's once we get out of the cities, out of the big cities, and so for example, if you're in Cape Town and you just head up the west coast, that's where I grew up. I grew up near Longabon, Saldanha, that area.
Nice.
And as soon as you get out of there, I mean, there is crime at some of those campsites, but once you a little bit further north, I mean,
on your way up to Namibia and
exactly,
everything.
exactly. Yeah, if you start exploring, there's a lovely trail along the west coast. You go through the Namakwa National Park. You can sleep on the beach on the coast there. It's just wonderful. But there's no one near you for hundreds of miles, and you feel
The Cederbergs were impressive.
exactly. Cederberg as well. Everyone I tell if they're going from Cape Town to Namibia, I say you've got to take a detour, either to Tankwa, Karoo, or Cederberg. It'll just blow your mind.
It was impressive.
Yeah, yeah,
And it was so remote that you didn't even see people on the road.
yeah.
Like there was nobody even walking. It
Exactly,
was just
yeah.
that remote. The villages were that far apart.
Yeah.
It was pretty impressive. Well, I mean, we could talk forever about Africa because it is such an incredible place on the planet. But when you look back on your time traveling in Africa, what would you say are a couple things that you feel kind of informed your travel, things that you really learned in Africa, or things that are unique to Africa that helped you be a better traveler in the rest of the world?
You become so adept at getting on a plane, getting off a plane, reading a border post, and just the way you treat other human beings. Little things. So when I would land in Johannesburg and I'm picking up a press car and I know I'm heading to Botswana or Zimbabwe or somewhere, I would grab a whole lot of those free newspapers they leave there.
Sure.
And then when I walk into a border post and I clock, the guy's got a Man United football jersey on, I say, "Did you watch the game last night, brother?"
Yeah.
We lost 1-0. The ref wasn't great. You know, straight away, and then he forgets that he's there to do a job. And you talk football for 5 minutes. And say, "I bought you a free newspaper." Stamps your passport. A minute later, you're out. And you just another crazy incident. I was actually going to go see Kingsley in southern Ethiopia, and I landed at Addis, and we were late for the connecting flight to Arba Minch. And I knew if I went through customs and the airport, I would never get onto that connecting flight. And then Kingsley would have to wait an extra day.
Yeah.
So what I did, I got off the plane. There's a man standing at the bottom of the stairs. I said, "Listen, mate, there's my plane, the next one that's flying out. Here's my boarding pass. I'd already got it in London. Can you take me to that plane?" Now you're in another country. You've just landed. It's highly illegal what you're doing. He says, "No problem, sir." Walks me across there. Onto the other plane, so I know I'm not going to get my bag because it's not even off the first plane.
Yeah.
So, but I got my cameras with me. You don't need all you need is your cameras to work. You know.
Sure.
That. So I land in Arba Minch and I tell King the story and I said, "We've got a problem because I've not been stamped into Ethiopia." So we had to be careful when we went through police roadblocks, but it wasn't a problem. So you learn how to get by sometimes when things are a little bit tricky, and so that's why when you travel in Europe, it's a lot more. Everything seems so. I don't want to say stale.
Yeah, it's organized, but it does lack some spirit.
You can't do that. If you try and offer somebody something, but then you feel probably a lot more comfortable here because it's so easy and everything sort of works, and you don't get upset if a train is 5 minutes late. It's nothing really.
Yeah.
In the great 5 minutes is nothing. I mean,
Exactly.
I sat once at Dar Airport for 2 days because there was a crack in the windscreen of the plane and we couldn't fly to Burundi. But it's just the way it is.
It's the way it is.
So there's a lovely saying. It says that the Swiss invented the clock, but the Africans own the time. so you really learn to. You're at the mercy of that border official, and you need to make sure that you don't upset him. Even if you got the wrong paperwork, there's still a way of getting around it. So you can carry on with your journey, and that's something you learn very quickly. Otherwise, you shouldn't be traveling in Africa then. Yeah.
You have to be flexible.
Yeah.
I mean, after my border incident with Djibouti, where I was there for 3.5 days, it's just you just end up sharing food with the border officials and have a laugh, and then you have to be, because it was the start of Ramadan, so we had to be very respectful and not eat during the day either, because that's basically like giving a middle finger to somebody who's not eating all day long.
Exactly.
So we wouldn't eat during the day, or we would be very cautious and try to eat hiding in the vehicle or something like that. But just by having a little bit of humanity, we ended up having the police force really starting to advocate for us with the customs officials. Because they're like, look, these guys they're good guys. Why are we holding them up?
Yeah.
So they do come to your aid as well.
A lot of my early travel was on my own, where you just have a vehicle and you go out to do a story, and it's so tough to shoot a vehicle when there's no other driver. You know what it's like. But I think that it forced me to interact with locals. So I would throw a couple of footballs in the back of the vehicle, and fitness every evening when I pulled up somewhere, lock the vehicle, walk around, find some locals playing a football game, and you play an hour or two with them. You get fit. It's your exercise for the day, and you sleep well that night. And they know they know you're camping there, and they leave you alone, and they make sure that you're okay, and because they feel that you're part of them. And when you finish the game of football, you say, no, you keep that ball.
Keep the ball.
Yeah, I learned a lot from Kingsley about humanity and the way he treats other people. I get goosebumps when I say that to you, because
and you've known him a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I've been interviewing him since I started out as a four-wheel drive journalist. He's like my dad. You know, he's my dad of African travel, and we phone each other. If I'm in trouble, I phone him, and he picks up the phone. And if I need advice, you know, we're there for each other. And if he needs a story or something and needs to promote something, and his latest expedition, we're there for each other. So I think I've been to 32 countries with him in Africa. That's phenomenal. So
I remember when I interviewed him, I've always been impressed by him, and I just met him purely by chance the first time at breakfast at a hotel. He was at the same hotel.
That's crazy.
And I was having breakfast, and I was like, I know. I didn't know who he was, but I recognized him. Recognized him. We had a little chat, and then he invited us to a Land Rover event he was doing in Cape Town.
And a special thanks to Equipped Expedition Outfitters for supporting this week's podcast. I've known the owner, Paul May, for over 20 years and have experienced his dedication to the industry firsthand during our travels together in North America and Africa. Equipped believes in the transformative power of adventure travel. Equipped imports some of the world's most respected brands like Easy On, National Luna, Alubox, and Escape Gear, while also selling scout campers and AT Overland habitats to the Utah region. For more information, visit equipone.com. That is equipped, EQUIPT, and the number 1.com.
So I got to hear him speak for the first time, and I realized that this guy he's very, very special. And like you just talked about the goosebumps when I interviewed him at his home. I was that way the whole interview, just listening to this person that has learned so much about what it is to be human and to interact with others and to give a lot back. That interview is one of the ones I'm most proud of. So.
Yeah. I feel so privileged to have interviewed him so many times and to have been on so many expeditions with him. We've done some crazy stuff together. The once we flew a military plane into Central African Republic with the Discovery 4 in, and there was a 130 waiting there for us. There's a whole lot of VIPs and journalists, but after 3-4 days they left and I stayed behind. And then we drove from Central African Republic to Cameroon. And the only country he hadn't been to was Guinea-Bissau or Guinea-Conakry. Then he left us in Cameroon, and we drove still through Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, back to Ghana, gave the vehicle, the 130, back, handed it back in Ghana. But what an adventure for 2 weeks. And in Central African Republic, they had a boat race at the time. It's like Oxford, Cambridge on steroids. There's thousands of people racing in these boats, about 20 in each boat, all with the same colored T-shirts, and the Prime Minister fires a gun into the air, and then there's boat races kick off. And the first time there was another noise, and they thought they were supposed to start, and off they went, and they had to stop the race and come back. It was mayhem. But we got to see this race and meet the Prime Minister, and it was just mad. But these are the sort of interactions and experiences you have when you travel with this man, because he uses local guides, and they get him into all the right places, and sort of anything's possible. But the most important thing is he's always giving back to Africa. He's not just traveling through there and living in a bubble like a lot of people do when they travel through places. It's not. You can't travel like that in Africa. You got to be humble. And you got to give back to the continent.
And he's a masterful storyteller. So he brings other people along on the journey with him, whether they can't travel themselves or he inspires them to travel in that way. What are a couple things that you feel like you've learned from Kingsley in all of those travels?
I think the point I just raised now, we were traveling up the Mozambican coast and then into Tanzania, and we hired a guy to work for us for a few days and to tell us where to camp, a local, and we just kept on getting further and further away from this guy's house. And it's funny, he didn't have any teeth, so he had one or two teeth. His nickname was Megabyte, we called him. And poor old Megabyte, after about 5 or 6 days, we said, mate, listen, you've got to get back to your house and your family. And we gave him a couple of bucks, and then I don't know how he managed to get a few hundred Ks back, because there's no bus services
Sure.
where we were. So I learned from him, from Kingsley, how to interact with locals and how to be humble, and that's probably the most important thing. But I love kids, and I hate seeing people, animals suffer. So
Sure.
often when I'm on an expedition with him that gets too busy, I just head off on my own, and like I said to you earlier, I just go and play football with the kids or the locals, and so yeah, he definitely taught me that there's an art to traveling in Africa, and just little things like he has a little official letter. Some of them, when Nelson Mandela was still alive, signed by Nelson and Bishop Tutu, and when you show that at a border post, and I've done the same. I mean, I've applied it here in the UK when it was COVID and we weren't allowed to fly home. I made up a letter that said from a doctor to say it's safe that I can travel back to Africa to go home. So you learn all these skills that you can apply in
What does he call those books? His
scrolls.
Scrolls.
Scrolls of adventure, yeah.
Incredible.
I know.
They're absolutely, I mean, they're
And his
incredible.
drawings he does, and it gets everyone involved. So when they're doing some humanitarian work somewhere, people come and sign these books, and the kids are doing their artwork, and they're handing out reading glasses, and it's just, that's the way we should adventure through not just Africa, but any part of the world, really. So, yeah.
So what is the adventure that you've done that you were most proud of?
I think it was a trip I mentioned earlier. So I somehow convinced my boss at the time that I could go on a 6-week trip and I took 3 of my best mates with as well. And we drove from Johannesburg to source of the Nile, but it's everything we did along the way. We went to Malawi, we went to the Serengeti, went to Rwanda, crossed Lake Victoria. I didn't know at the time, but there's a place called Mwanza. So if you come out of the Serengeti, we stayed at Mwanza on the Victoria Lake, and we put our car on a boat, and we sailed across Lake Victoria into Rwanda.
It's a huge lake.
I know. It's nuts. I know it's nuts. So,
I mean, it really shocks you when you see it for the first time, because you can't see the other side in places.
Yeah, and I've been to the Serengeti previously, like 3 times with work, but this time, because I arranged everything myself, planned everything myself, and it all worked out so well. Just on that one trip, I learned so much about Africa, and I just wanted more of it. So yeah, that trip I did with my 3 mates, where we did so much, just an African overload in 6 weeks, but as much as we could.
And where is the source of the Nile?
It's in a place called Ginger. It's
in which country?
It's in Uganda.
Okay.
It's contentious. Some people say.
That's what I know. That I was curious your opinion.
Yeah.
A couple different viewpoints on
Obviously, I chatted to the experts beforehand to find out. So we went to one of the so-called sources of the Nile just to sort of tick that box. I would love to have gone further. I would love to have crossed the African continent. That's probably my biggest regret of travel. And then when I got back from that trip, there's a company in South Africa that does a lot of TV work, and they do a lot of trips, and they asked me to be the photographer from crossing Africa from Agulhas to Alexandria in Egypt. And then I started getting all my visas, and then my boss said, no, you can't go on another 2-month jolly. So we cancelled that at the last minute. So there's a lot of regret that I haven't crossed the African continent yet, but things might change in some parts, and then you could do a crossing.
Right now it's pretty challenging to get through Sudan.
Yeah, with jobs and kids and things, I just don't have the time to do a West African crossing. I don't. So hopefully in the future I will do one. But I don't have regrets. I've had so much fun on the continent, and I've done more than most ever will do. So no, but that one trip was very, very special. I mean,
I think it's an important thing for journalists to consider is there's a lot of very well-traveled journalists, but it's important to also break away from these scripted trips, or when you're traveling with someone else, and planning every single element of it yourself. Be the pointy end of the spear.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that I would like to see more journalists challenged to do is like what you did when you planned everything. You planned every border crossing. How much fuel did you need? What were the provisions for the vehicle? You dealt with every border crossing. And I think that that's something that I would like to see more overland journalists do, is don't go along on a scripted trip.
No.
Those are good too. Those are important.
Yeah.
And you learn a lot, or you can test the vehicle, but also do your, get grubby. Get some dirt under your nails, have to figure it out, interact with the border crossing officials, and learn those things. I think that's an important thing for journalists to do.
Definitely. Change the tire yourself. Because you're getting a press vehicle, I'm a bit like you when you took the Grenadier across Africa. Keep it simple. Only take the few little things that you need with. I mean, I've been on amazing trips. I've been on the G4 Challenge, staying 5-star hotels in Bangkok, and then doing 2 weeks of camping in these orange Land Rovers. Dakar Rally, amazing, sleeping in a tent every night. Very special trips, but like you said, it's all scripted. Everything's done for you. There's a PR of Toyota or Land Rover there, making sure that everything is fine. If you've got a tummy bug, they stick you in a hotel. I don't like that. I like to do my own thing. That's why often when people invite me on trips, I say, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. Yeah. I've done this a million times, and I'll be okay. You don't have to take anything with for me. I'll be all right.
Or at least have a balance of the two. Maybe once a year, you just go and you do your own thing.
Yeah.
And, again, be that pointy end of the spear where you're taking all of the hits and you're learning and you're adapting and you're really growing as a traveler. Because, like you said, those PR directors, their job is to make your life comfortable.
Of course.
So it's good to go and be uncomfortable or have the unknowns.
Yeah, but because then we pass it on in our everyday lives. I mean, even to my son, like next Monday, Tuesday, I'm off work and I'm thinking, what can we do that's an adventure? I mean, you don't have to go a million miles. It's just take the paddle boards, take the tents on the paddleboard, a little barbecue, a little gas stove, and we're going to go wild camp somewhere along a river. Just where we live. Just where we live. You don't have to travel a million miles to have an adventure. You can have one in your backyard. My son often he'll build a little shelter in the backyard and he wants to sleep in it. It's so important to pass that on to the next generation of adventurers. Yeah.
Well, and because you experienced so much of that in South Africa, and now living in the UK with your son, how do you make sure that he has those same experiences?
You can still have it. So I mean, Christmas we'll go to Australia for 2 weeks. We go back to Africa as often as we can. We're already planning April next year. We want to go for 2 weeks to Africa. He needs to see wildlife in their natural habitat. Yeah, we go to London Zoo and Whipsnade Zoo. It's not the same. It's good and it's great for education. He loves animals, but he needs to go to the Serengeti. He needs to go to the Kruger. He needs to go to Etosha. Yeah. He needs to experience the real deal. Yeah.
And it changes our view on wildlife, and it changes our view on wild places, and how do we preserve them for future generations.
Exactly that.
Because it's really important that we have a connection to those things.
And who knows, maybe he will play a big part in preserving and conserving the wildlife for future generations. I want him to do that. Yeah.
So if someone was getting just started in overland travel, this is a question that I ask most of the guests on the podcast. What would be your 2-3 pieces of advice that you would give someone that was just getting started? Or another way to frame the question, if you were to be able to go back in time to that kid who just got the job at SA 4x4, what would you tell yourself? What 2 or 3 pieces of advice would you give yourself about travel if you could go back in time?
You don't need a new Toyota Land Cruiser or an old Defender, which has become so expensive. I used to have a little Ford Bantam Bucky 1300 pickup with a canopy on the back, throw a mattress in the back. You just need a spirit of adventure, a sense of adventure. The lovely thing about a country like South Africa or even the UK, you've got Europe on your doorstep. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I was paddling down the River Tarn in the south of France, white water, and I was out of my comfort zone. But I felt that I was living on the edge, and I was falling off that board, and about 10 times, and I snapped 2 fins. But I was pushing my life. I was challenging myself. So there are adventures to be had anyway. So I think adventure is a mindset, and it's about how badly you want it. That's the first bit of advice. The other one is just keep it simple. You don't need all this fancy gear that these companies make. You just need a little bit of food, a bit of water, a little mattress to sleep on, and off you go. You don't need all the fancy stuff. So,
and if you find that there's a big gap, then maybe you add something.
Of course.
But don't start by throwing the catalog at it.
No.
Just add things as you find you really need them.
Yeah, you learn so much when you've been in it for a really long time. You learn what you really need. You know that better than most. So yeah, keep it simple, and it's all, adventure is a mindset, and just get out there and do these things. Just live your life, man. We're not here forever. Get out there and have adventures. Every day should be an adventure. Yeah. Especially now, I mean, we're in the middle of summer here in the northern hemisphere, so in the evenings we don't eat inside. We barbecue virtually every night. Even if it's in our back garden, but we're having an adventure.
You have a proper braai.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know I've been here too long, I call it a barbecue.
Well, before we started recording, you mentioned that you're getting ready to go do the London Marathon.
The New York Marathon.
New York Marathon.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, but first this weekend, I've got another adventure on, of course, as you do. So I've taken Friday off, and I'm going to go paddle 100 kilometers on the River Trent.
Okay.
So that'll be fun. And I saw some pictures yesterday that's fast flowing. We've had a lot of rain, but the sun's coming out tomorrow, so it'll be 26 degrees and 100 kilometers on my paddleboard. But that's sort of, I've been watching this thing called the Yukon 1000 this week. It's a 1,000-kilometer paddle, 1,000 miles. I'm not sure it's miles or kilometers in the Yukon, and that looks. So I'll do this thing this weekend, and then I'll maybe go and enter something crazy like.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Like the Yukon, but it's self-supported. You've got to take bear spray, and it's pretty.
This is stand-up paddleboarding.
Yeah.
For 1,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to have bear spray. Although, I mean, the bears are really big up there, so I don't know how much the bear spray would help.
I know. You probably just find a little island somewhere to sleep on, but they can swim, so.
They can.
Or you just don't stop paddling for it. And then I've got, in November, I've got the New York City Marathon. So I did it 25 years ago, and I did a good time, 3 hours 30, and the plan is to see if I can go faster as a 50-year-old than I did when I was 25 years old. And I think I can, so I'm training quite hard for that. So I don't just go on adventures and camp. I like to do physical things as well. So I like to get out there and run and climb and cycle and paddle and
Well, that's going to allow you to have those adventures for longer by being healthy.
I hope so. Yeah.
Maybe one last question on that subject then. What are a couple things that you have learned that help keep you healthy and fit for the adventures that you do? What do you think are the big levers that you pull for health?
I mean, you could say things like diet, but as a South African, I love eating meat, and I think probably eat unprocessed foods if you can as much. Yeah. But it's just about doing something every day, really. I mean, even here in London, you just go out for a walk every day for an hour. At least that is something. So it's all about your lifestyle. Once you are outdoors, you are walking 10,000 steps a day or whatever you need to. But set yourself goals. So I've got this 100K paddle in 2 days. Obviously, I've trained for it. Or New York Marathon, I've started training for that. So once you have goals, and they don't have to be crazy stuff, even just go and climb.
They don't have to be 1,000 kilometers across the Yukon.
No. With my son, for my son, it's a big deal if he does a 5 or a 10K paddle or a 20K cycle. He's only 10 years old. So I'm teaching him from a young age that he can do these things. Mm-hmm. So, or I'll take him. We go and climb Mount Snowdon in Wales. It's a full day adventure for him, and so So just
that's good advice.
Set yourself a little goal. Yeah.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been an honor to know you now for over a decade, and it's been fun to be able to interact on a bunch of different projects. And I look forward to hearing the updates on the New York Marathon, on possibly even the Yukon. Maybe we'll get you on the podcast for that one.
Brilliant. Right. It's so good to see you, my friend.
Yeah,
thank you for your time.
Thank you. And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.